If there is a word that has dominated Donald Trump's second term, it's tariffs. Along the way, there have been threats, pauses, and postponements. But Wednesday, branded Liberation Day by the U.S. president, was the day he finally revealed the extent of his promised tariffs. So what are tariffs? What is being introduced? And what could all this mean for the UK? Tariffs are taxes on goods imported into a country. It is the importers buying the goods who pay the tariffs. Therefore, in the case of the U.S., American companies. Ultimately, the intent is to protect U.S. manufacturing and bolster jobs by making foreign-made products less attractive. But that can take time, with companies first having to put in place the infrastructure to produce their goods in the U.S. There is also a knock-on effect for consumers. To compensate for tariffs, companies put up their prices, so customers end up paying more for goods. Tariffs can also damage foreign countries as they make their products pricier and, therefore, harder to sell. What happened on Liberation Day? Mr. Trump branded April Liberation Day, promising to unveil the reciprocal tariffs on countries deemed to be giving the U.S. a bad deal on trade. And that's exactly what he did, saying the world would be hit with blanket Trump U.S. tariffs, with 60 nations facing additional reciprocal tariffs. In a speech, he held up a chart titled Reciprocal Tariffs and proceeded to compare tariffs imposed by other countries on the U.S. against Washington's own new levies. The sweeping tariffs included a 10% trade tariff on all imports from the UK. He confirmed the European Union would face a 20% reciprocal tariff on all other imports. China's rate was set at 34%. It was also confirmed that further U.S. tariffs were planned on some individual sectors, including semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and critical mineral imports. Here are some of the standout tariffs from the chart. China, 34%; EU, 20%; India, 26%; UK, 10%; Japan, 24%; Australia, 10%; Ukraine, 10%. The baseline 10% tariffs are set to come into effect on 5 April, and the specific reciprocal tariff forms for what Mr. Trump called the worst offenders are set for 9th of April. Canada and Mexico were left off the chart for reciprocal tariffs, but Mr. Trump had already announced 25% tariffs on them. What tariffs have already been introduced? Some tariffs have already come into effect, with Mr. Trump confirming them in advance of 2nd of April. Here's a roundup. A 25% tariff on all cars imported to the U.S., with a similar tariff on car parts expected to follow in May. A 25% tariff on all imports from any country that buys oil or gas from Venezuela. A 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports to the U.S. A 10% tax on all imports from China, later doubled to 20%. 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, pause for a month and set to resume on 3rd April. How has the UK reacted? After Mr. Trump's 2 April announcement, Sir Keir Starmer said the government was moving to the next stage of our plan after negotiations with the U.S. failed to fend off any tariffs. He promised any decisions will be guided only by our national interest, in the interest of our economy, in the interests of businesses around this table, in the interest of putting money in the pockets of working people. Clearly, there will be an economic impact from the decisions the U.S. has taken, both here and globally, he said. But I want to be crystal clear. We are prepared. Indeed, one of the great strengths of this nation is our ability to keep a cool head. Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said, "We will always act in the best interests of UK businesses and consumers." That's why throughout the last few weeks, the government has been fully focused on negotiating an economic deal with the United States that strengthens our existing fair and balanced trading relationship. The U.S. is our closest ally, so our approach is to remain calm and committed to doing this deal, which we hope will mitigate the impact of what has been announced today. We have a range of tools at our disposal, and we will not hesitate to act. We will continue to engage with UK businesses, including on their assessment of the impact of any further steps we take. Nobody wants a trade war, and our intention remains to secure a deal, but nothing is off the table, and the government will do everything necessary to defend the UK's national interest. He told Wilfred Frost on Sky News Breakfast his job is not done when it comes to negotiating a trade deal. Mr. Reynolds refused to say if the tariffs might cause a global recession and said the UK had safeguards in place to ensure it was not flooded with goods that would have gone to other countries. We'll take any powers we need to protect the British people and the British economy from that, he said. What we have directly within our power, alongside that, is, of course, the ability to negotiate a better deal in the national interest for the UK. That's been our approach to date, and we'll continue with that. What impact could tariffs have on the UK? The car tariff could be particularly problematic for the UK. As data shows, the US is the UK car sector's largest single market by country, accounting for 6.4 billion worth of car exports in 2023, 18.4% of the total. Research for the Institute for Public Policy Research has suggested more than 25,000 direct jobs in the UK car manufacturing industry alone could be at risk from the tariffs on car exports to the US. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, SMMT, had said the tariff costs could not be absorbed by manufacturers and may lead to a review of output. The tariffs now on UK exports pose a big risk to growth, and the so-called headroom chancellor Rachel Reeves was forced to restore to the public finances at the spring statement, risking further spending cuts or tax rises ahead to meet her fiscal rules. A member of the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, David Miles, told MPs on Tuesday that U.S. tariffs at 20% or 25% maintained on the UK for 5 years would knock out all the headroom the government currently has. But he added that a very limited tariff war that the UK stays out of could be mildly positive. He said, there's a bit of trade that will get diverted to the UK, and some of the exports from China, for example, that would have gone to the US. They'll be looking for a home for them in the rest of the world. And stuff would be available in the UK a bit cheaper than otherwise would have been. So there is one not central scenario at all, which is very, very mildly potentially positive to the UK. All the other ones which involve the UK facing tariffs are negative, and they're negative to very different extents. Even if no tariffs had been put on all UK exports to the US, consumers here were still expected to be impacted by the wider trade war. Economists believe that tariffs will raise costs in the US, sparking a wave of inflation that will keep interest rates higher for longer. The US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, is mandated to act to bring inflation down. More expensive borrowing and costlier goods and services could bring about an economic downturn in the US and have knock-on effects in the UK. Forecasts from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, NIESR, predict lower UK economic growth due to higher global interest rates. It is estimated that UK GDP, a measure of everything produced in the economy, could be between 2.5% and 3% lower over 5 years and 0.7% lower this year. EU reacts after hefty tariff announced. The UK got off lightly compared to the European Union, which has been handed a 20% tariff by Mr. Trump. As a result, the EU, which consists of 27 countries, has vowed to retaliate. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said on Thursday morning that Mr. Trump's tariffs would have dire consequences for millions of people around the world, and that there seemed to be no order in the disorder of the actions of the U.S. Donald Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the EU, is a major blow to the world economy, she said. I deeply regret this choice. The global economy will massively suffer and uncertainty will spiral. The consequences will be dire for millions around the world. The EU last month announced 26 billion of countermeasures against a range of U.S. goods, scheduled to take effect later this month, in response to separate 25% tariffs on European steel and aluminium. We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel, said von der Leyen on Thursday morning. We're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail. She added, "We will stand together. Our unity is our strength." Why is Trump so big on tariffs? In his second term, Mr. Trump has frequently used them, or the threat of them, as a trade weapon. They are a key part of his efforts to reshape global trade relations, and he has imposed a swathe of what he calls reciprocal taxes that match tariffs levied by other nations. Announcing the tariffs, he claimed trillions of dollars from the reciprocal levies he was imposing on others' trade barriers would provide relief for the U.S. taxpayer and restore U.S. jobs and factories. He added the U.S. had been looted, pillaged, raped, plundered by other nations. Tariffs were also a part of his playbook in his first term, when he imposed taxes on most goods coming from China and used them as a bargaining chip to force Canada and Mexico to renegotiate a North American trade pact. On his first day back in office, the U.S. president promised 25% tariffs on all products coming into the U.S. from its nearest neighbors, Mexico and Canada, ostensibly to force the countries to tackle illegal migration and fentanyl crossing the border.
After all, this intricate system of infrastructure and factory was purpose-built to feed into the defence industry. Even today, the way it functions with those dams and underground tunnels is pretty much unique. So much as this place provided most of the metal going into Britain's Spitfires in World War II, might it rediscover a similar role in the 21st century?
This plant right now doesn't supply into those markets, but usually they could. It was set up to supply the defence industry and other parts of the UK demand for aluminum. So, if need be, we could do that.
But with tariffs now a reality, the truth is it will be harder, not easier, for this plant to keep producing. And aluminium is not the only example of a metal and an industry facing a tariffs crisis. Further down in the periodic table, you find a suite of other elements which, when combined, become stainless steel. The journey for that steel begins here. In this electric arc furnace, into which scrap, old car parts, kitchen sinks and so on is tipped before the electrodes are lowered and switched on. That is the sound of a lightning storm in that cauldron, which sucks in more electricity than a small city to melt down the scrap. Into this molten stainless steel, still made in Britain, one of the most important metallic substances in the world. It's processed further and then formed into long bars, billets as they're known. Up to a fifth of them go to the US.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
UK will also be hit.
As the deadline for those tariffs approached, this company raced to get their steel to America just in time. 2 of their ships were supposed to dock a day or so before, but then they were hit by a storm.
It was going to be tight. We were seeing there were warnings for very poor weather systems in the Atlantic, so we're watching the ETA go longer and longer until, unfortunately, it was beyond, and then, unfortunately, there was no catch-up after that.
The upshot of that is, what you said, £3 million?
Yes, about £3 million of tariffs to pay, given the 25%.
As far as we know, this company is the first major British casualty of Donald Trump's trade war. And this is the reality of tariffs, of arbitrary deadlines costing businesses millions of dollars. In Marchegalia's case, the irony is that stainless steel is simply being shifted from its UK furnace here to its American unit, which will go on to process it further. Even so, still the tariffs have to be paid, and that has consequences.
In the future, we will obviously have to take more planning and decide whether the margins are sufficient for us to continue some of this production.
This might affect jobs here.
So when there's a depressed market and we're losing 15 to 20%, there are some product lines that will be at risk, and with it, there is a fear of job losses, yes.
That's more bad news for a sector which has faced decade after decade of job cuts.
How's everyone feeling about this kind of roller coaster?
With Trump's tariffs, it just feels like it's another nail in the coffin, and it's devastating. It's had a devastating impact on us here specifically because...
But people feel it, do they?
Yeah, they do. They know what's going on. I mean, everything's happening in the world, everybody's bills are going up and all that, and the one thing we've got here is a good, secure job with good terms and conditions.
In the coming months, Donald Trump says there will be more tariffs. So imagine this extrapolated across sectors, across communities, across the country, as companies that thought they had a viable business suddenly don't. But amid the economic damage, there are, surprising as this might sound, some opportunities. Let's travel across the periodic table to tungsten, the toughest of all metals. Used in armour, weapons, drill bits and semiconductors, it is everyone's definition of a critical mineral. Here in Devon, where the landscape is littered with remnants of its mining past, old copper and tin mines are tourist attractions these days. But under the ground here, you'll find an extraordinary thing. One of the single biggest resources of tungsten to be found anywhere in the world. The Hemerdon mine was where Britain's defence industry got the tungsten it needed for its weapons and armour in World War I and II. And at first glance, it looks just like any other mine. Big hole in the ground, big processing plant, big tailings dam for all the waste. But now, look a little closer. Can you see it? No diggers, no workers, no mining. The processing facility lies dormant. The machines abandoned. In theory, these could be refining thousands of tons of tungsten every year, turning Britain into a powerhouse. But so far, every company trying to turn this place into a success has failed. The man in charge of trying to make it work this time is still working on securing funding.
What's this here? This is the open pit mining operation that was in existence up to 2019, and now it's just a large hole in the ground.
There's no mining happening right now.
No activity.
This hole was dug by the last company here.
By Wolfman, that's correct.
Okay. And they then went into receivership.
Mining.
And the project's really been at the point where it stopped at that time, ever since. Well, this is our granite ore, which is part of the main ore body running through this part of the pit. You can see the various quartz veins in the granite, and most importantly for us is what you see here. This is tungsten. So this is the material we're recovering.
That's the tungsten. You can actually see it?
You can, yes.
Can I touch it?
Yeah, go for it.
So that's really rare to find tungsten like that, is it? I mean, elsewhere around the world.
You will find a lot of deposits will have a quartz vein hosted tungsten material. We are just blessed with a lot of it, a lot of tons of material, which makes us one of the world's biggest resources of tungsten.
And that matters, today more than ever. First, because in a world that's remilitarising, tungsten becomes all important. Second, because right now, 80% of the world's tungsten comes from China. And in retaliation against Donald Trump's tariffs, China has just slapped export controls on tungsten. In other words, this mine could step in just at the critical moment.
And the point with tungsten is it's hard.
Very hard, very high melting point, and very dense as well, very heavy.
And that makes it really important for defence as well.
Correct. And that's why it hits NATO's critical metal list as well.
It's quite kind of tantalising.
It's so close. You can touch it. You can see it. It's here. We're fully permitted, ready to start.
Here, in short, is that rare thing, an opportunity from tariffs. There couldn't be a better time in theory. Just as, in theory, Britain has never needed metals like steel and aluminium more. The problem is, businesses crave certainty, but whether it's trade or defence, the world is becoming more uncertain.
Well, if there's one thing we've learnt so far from Donald Trump's tariffs plan, it's that we don't really know what's going to happen next. And that uncertainty makes it incredibly difficult to plan. How do you plan to defend yourself if you're a steel maker or an aluminium maker in Britain? How do you plan for an opportunity like this mine? The short answer is it's going to be tough, because we're just living in a far more chaotic world.
But the reverberations of Donald Trump's tariffs policy are just beginning. From the south of England to the industrial heartlands where steelmaking began, into the farthest reaches of Scotland, a trade war is beginning, with consequences we are only starting to fathom.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. We have always been ready to negotiate with the United States to remove the remaining barriers to transatlantic trade. At the same time, we are prepared to respond. We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel, and we're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail. I know that many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us. Europe stands together for our business, for our citizens, and for all Europeans, and we will continue to build bridges with all those that, like us, care about fair and rules-based trade as a basis for shared